The yellow house, there are pains that are never expressed in words, but they cling to you like a shadow, creeping into every breath, every dream, and even the most peaceful days. My name is Maria Schmidt, but in the small town of Heidelberg, people call me Maria of the pastry shop. At 71 years old, I stand behind a small pastry shop in the market square, where the aroma of gingerbread, cinnamon, stars, and donuts spreads, drawing children and adults alike. Who would have thought that the little Maria who used to tremble in fear every evening would now be the one bringing joy through pastries? But before I tell you about those sunny days, I want to take you to a place where the light never reaches the yellow house at the end of Linden Street. The Yellow House Heidelberg in the 1950s was a small town where everyone thought they knew everyone. The cobblestone streets, the houses with sloping roofs, and the church bells that rang every Sunday morning created a peaceful picture. But behind closed doors, there were secrets that even the sunlight could not reach. My family's yellow house was such a place. I was born in 1954, in that house, where the pale yellow walls used to be my whole world. The house was not big, with only a few simple rooms, but my mother, Helga, always kept everything so clean that the wooden floors were as shiny as mirrors. The smell of floor polish mixed with the scent of ripe apples from the apple trees in the backyard, creating a memory that was both sweet and bitter. In the garden, besides the apples, there was also a plum tree and an old sink, where I used to play on summer days. Back then, I thought it was my paradise. But that paradise, like all fairy tales, always had a dark side. My father, Johannes Schmidt, worked in the tax office. He was a tall man with a voice like thunder. The floor shook when he got angry. He was respected in town, always the first to arrive at church, sitting in the front row, singing the loudest hymns. He appeared at neighborhood meetings with a big smile, and was often the last to leave the pub. A man of his word, people said of him, a model father. But in the yellow house, he was someone else. Someone I, an 8-year-old girl, had learned to fear. My mother, Helga, was a primary school teacher. She was a stern-looking woman, her hair always tied into a tight bun, her skirts reaching below her knees, her nails clipped short. Through her glasses, her eyes were sharp enough to silence naughty students. At home, she was quiet, like her father's shadow, a shadow that grew larger, smaller, depending on his mood. I was their only child, after my mother had lost children before. A miracle from God, my mother said of me, but sometimes in her eyes, I saw an inexplicable sadness, as if I were a burden she did not want to bear. The yellow house was both heaven and hell for me. Heaven, because in my early days, I used to run around in the garden, laugh loudly when my mother taught me to knit scarves, and sleep soundly in her arms. Hell, because what happened next wiped out all the light in me. Carefree days when I was 7, my life was like that of any other child in Heidelberg. I went to school, played with the neighborhood kids, helped my mother wipe the tables and chairs, or picked vegetables in the kitchen. My father was strict, occasionally hitting me when I did something wrong, a slap, a whip with a belt, or a spanking with a slipper. But that was not unusual in those days. Children need the rod to become good men, the adults used to say. I didn't think much of it, just obeyed, because obedience was the only way to avoid punishment. I loved school, loved the art classes, where I could draw houses of all colors, not just yellow. I loved playing jump rope with my friends, loved the laughter when we chased each other around the square. Life, though simple, was full of joy. But everything changed on my 8th birthday. It was a special day. My mother gave me a blue dress with white polka dots, so beautiful that I couldn't stop looking at it in the mirror. She also secretly made me a rag doll, with golden wool hair and button eyes. I hugged the doll, jumping around the house, my heart filled with happiness. That lunch, the whole family gathered around the dining table. My father, as usual, sat at the head of the table, eating quietly. But there was a moment when I looked up and saw his eyes on me. A strange look, not like the eyes of a father. It made me shiver, though I didn't know why. The first night of terror that night, Mother went to church, as she did every first Friday. I stayed home with Father, which was not uncommon. Usually he told me to go to bed early, and he sat in the living room listening to the radio. But that night, things were different. "Come here, Maria," he called from the kitchen, his voice low and cold. "Help me with something." I crept in, holding the doll. Father was leaning against the sink, looking into the fireplace. "Look at this sink," he said, his voice full of reproach. "It's so dirty. Your mother didn't clean it." I looked at the sink. It was shiny, nothing dirty. But I didn't dare argue. "I'll tell you when she gets home," I whispered. "No. I'll clean it now." I tried to explain that I was too small to reach, that the cold water hurt my hands in the cold winter, but he wouldn't listen. He pointed to the wooden chair and ordered me to climb up. I did as I was told, shaking, trying my best to clean the dishes. But I was only an 8-year-old. Water splashed, soap stuck to the dishes, the dishcloth dropped a plate on the floor, shattering. Then he began. "Do you see why your mother didn't want any more children after you?" he said, his voice sharp as a knife. "Because I saw that you were useless." The words were like needles stabbing into my heart. I lowered my head, trying to continue washing, tears blurring my vision. "Nothing useless. Do you know what happens to useless girls? They deserve to be punished." He walked to the corner of the kitchen, picked up a long-handled straw broom. I thought he was going to hit me on the leg, like the time I spilled the milk. But he didn't. "Take off your clothes," he ordered. I was stunned, not understanding. "Take off your clothes? In the kitchen?" I hugged the doll tightly, my voice trembling. "Daddy, it's cold. Take off your clothes." The scream startled me, and the doll fell to the floor. With trembling hands, I stripped off my polka dot blue dress, standing there in my underwear, trying to cover myself with my skinny arms. "Take it all off," he roared. I stripped off, standing naked in the kitchen, a mixture of humiliation and fear. Why did my father want to see me like this? He took the broom handle, touched my stomach, and slid it down. The coldness of the wood made me shiver. "Look at me," he commanded. I closed my eyes, not daring to open them. "Look at me." I opened them, and it was no longer my father. It was a monster with his face, with hungry eyes. What happened next, I will not tell you in detail. Not because I was ashamed. I had long since learned to wash away that shame, but because I did not want those images to haunt anyone. Just know that it was painful, so painful that I thought I would die. He used the broom handle in a way that no object should ever be used, no child should ever feel. When I was finished, I was bleeding, curled up on the floor. He threw clothes at me. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you and your mother. Now mop." I mopped my blood from the kitchen floor, while he went back into the living room, turning on the radio, as if nothing had happened. I trudged back to my room, wrapped myself in the blanket, and cried until I had no more tears. The physical pain was terrible, but the mental pain was worse. I didn't understand what I had done wrong to make my father, who was supposed to protect me, do this. My mother's betrayal. When my mother came home from church, I tried to tell her. She came into the room and saw that I was still awake. "What's wrong, honey? Can't sleep?" I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear was too great. What if my father kept his threat? What if he killed us both? I just shook my head. "Then go to sleep. School tomorrow." She left, closing the door. It was that simple. She didn't see the tears, didn't notice the fear, or pretended not to. That night, a part of me died. My trust, my sense of security, my childhood. I thought it was just a one-time thing, a punishment for not cleaning the sink. But I was wrong. In the weeks that followed, whenever Mom went out, he would find a way. There was always an excuse. The house wasn't clean. I was late for school. My grades weren't good enough. "Get the broom," he said, and I obeyed, because I didn't know what else to do. The worst part came when I found out that my mother knew, or at least suspected. One afternoon, I came home from school, my skirt covered in mud from a fall on the street. My father was furious. "Go to your room," he ordered. I entered, trembling. He followed me with a broom, but this time, I saw that the door wasn't completely closed. Through the crack in the door, as I lay in bed in agony, I saw my mother standing in the hallway, watching. Our eyes met. She saw me in pain, saw my silent plea. And what did she do? Nothing. She closed the door and left. That night, I understood the real betrayal. Not just my father, but my mother too. The one who was supposed to protect me had turned her back on me. I was alone, facing both of them. And so the hell in the yellow house began. There are days when you wake up, look at the sunlight filtering through the curtains, and wonder if you can pretend that everything is okay. But in the yellow house, the sunshine was just a sweet lie, hiding the dark corners that I, an 8-year-old girl, learned to live with. I am Maria Schmidt, and this is the sequel to the story of my stolen childhood. If you heard the first part, you know about the yellow house, about my father, the man with two faces, and my mother, who chose to remain silent in the face of her child's pain. If you haven't heard it, I suggest you go back, because this story is not something that can be understood by only hearing half of it. Today, I will tell you about the years that followed, when the nightmare not only continued, but became darker, and when I began to find a small, albeit fragile, ray of light in that darkness. The nightmare that lasted. After the night of my 8th birthday, I thought it would all stop. I told myself it was just a one-time thing, a terrible punishment for my clumsiness, for not cleaning the sink as my father wanted. But children are naive, and I was wrong. In the weeks that followed, whenever my mother went to church or ran errands, my father would come calling. There was always a reason. I had dropped a spoon in the kitchen, I was 5 minutes late from school, or simply the house wasn't clean. "Get the broom," he said, his voice as deep as a rock pressing against my chest. And I did, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. How could an 8-year-old girl, small and weak, stand up to a big man, whom the whole town called the model father? That straw broom with its wooden handle became a symbol of fear. It was no longer an ordinary kitchen item. Every time I saw it propped up in the corner, my heart would pound, my hands would shake so much I couldn't hold a pencil. The abuse wasn't just physical. My father knew how to make me feel worthless. "You're a worthless child," he said, as I knelt on the floor wiping away my own blood. "Your mother is ashamed of you. You know that?" Those words, like knives, cut deep into my soul, making me believe that I deserved everything that was happening. My mother, Helga, was part of the nightmare. I told her about the time I saw her through the crack in the door, watching as my father abused me. Her eyes, cold and empty, haunted me more than the wounds on my body. After that, I paid more attention. There were nights when she was home, but pretended not to see anything. Once, I heard her say to my father, in a low whisper, "Don't make noise, the neighbors will hear." Not stop, not don't hurt her, but don't make noise. The words were like a slap in the face. My mother, who was supposed to protect me, had chosen to stand by my father, or at least, chose to keep her own peace. The loneliness of a child at school. I became a strange girl. Before, I was Maria who loved to laugh, to run, to draw colorful houses. But now, I was Maria, quiet, always wearing long-sleeved shirts, even though it was hot in the summer, always sitting at the back of the class, not playing during recess, not talking, not smiling. My grades plummeted. How could I concentrate on studying literature when my whole body was in pain? How could I solve math problems when my mind was filled with the sound of the key turning into the lock every afternoon? The teachers realized something was wrong, but at that time, adults did not interfere in family matters. They thought it was normal for children to be sad, that I would get over it. Only Miss Schmidt, no, not a relative, just the same last name, the history teacher, was the only one who noticed. She was petite, with silver hair tied in a ponytail, wearing big round glasses, always looking at me with a strange look. Not pity, but understanding. One day, she kept me after school. "Maria, is everything okay at home?" The simple question made me want to cry. No one had asked me that in a long time. I tried to say yes, as I always did, but my throat tightened. "No, it's not okay," I whispered, but I didn't say more. The fear was greater than the pain. "I'm here whenever you want to talk," Miss Schmidt said, and put her hand on my shoulder. The gesture, small but warm, was the first ray of light I saw in the darkness. Body changes. Fear grows. When I was 10, my body began to change. My breasts grew, my hips widened, and my first period arrived. I was afraid, not because of the natural changes, but because I knew they would make things worse. I tried to hide them, wearing loose shirts, looking down as I passed my father. But he noticed. "You're growing up," he said once, with a smile that sent chills down my spine. "But you're still a useless girl, aren't you?" From then on, he was more careful, not to protect me, but to make sure I didn't get pregnant. "If you give birth to a bastard, I'll kill you," he threatened. But that didn't stop him. The broom was still his tool, used in ways that made me feel like my body was no longer mine. Every time, I tried to withdraw into a small corner of my mind, imagining myself as a little bird flying away from the yellow house, flying to a place where there was no pain. But when it was all over, I was still there, on the cold floor, bruised and humiliated. I began to think about death, not because I wanted to die, but because I didn't know how to go on living. I used to look at the knife in the kitchen, wondering if it could free me. But then I remembered Miss Schmidt's eyes, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. The first resistance, I was 10 years old. I tried to resist. It was an autumn afternoon. Yellow leaves were falling all over Linden Street. I came home from school, my skirt covered in mud from falling on the street. My father was in the kitchen, holding a glass of beer. "Look at you, dirty as a pig," he snapped. "Go to your room. You know what will happen." I was shaking, but this time, a small fire burned inside me. I didn't want to. I couldn't take it anymore. When he came closer with the broom, I pushed him away with all the strength of my skinny arms. He staggered, surprised. I ran to the front door, my heart pounding, thinking that if I just got out, if I just got to the square, I would be safe. But my mother stood there, blocking my way. "Where do you think you're going, Maria?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. "Let me go, Mom, please," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Go back, Dad's not done yet." And she pushed me back toward him, like returning a toy. This time, my punishment was more severe. My father didn't just use the broom. He slapped me, leaving my face swollen. "Don't ever do that again," he roared, "or you'll lose not only your mother, but your life." I lay in bed, in pain, and for the first time, I felt truly alone. Not only did my father betray me, but my mother, whom I had thought was my refuge, also abandoned me. A fragile light despite living in the darkness. I began to notice small rays of light. Miss Schmidt was still there, always watching over me. One time, she gave me a small notebook, telling me to write or draw whenever I felt sad. "Sometimes putting the pain on paper helps lighten it," she said. I didn't dare write anything about my parents, afraid they would find out, but I drew. I drew birds, houses without doors, skies without clouds. Those drawings were where I put my dreams, the dream of one day being able to fly away. Miss Schmidt also began to keep me after school more, not to tutor me but to talk. She told me about her childhood, about the hardships she had gone through, though she never said anything. "You are stronger than you think, Maria," she said. "Don't let anyone make you think you are weak." Those words, though small, planted a seed of hope in me. I began to think, if she believed in me strongly, maybe I could really do something. My story does not end here. In the years that followed, the pain continued, but the seed of hope that Miss Schmidt planted gradually sprouted. In the next part, I will tell about the day I decided to speak up, about how Miss Schmidt became my savior, and about my journey to finding myself again. If you are listening, please leave a comment. Let me know what you think, and if possible, give me a like. Each encouragement is a reminder that my story, though painful, is still worth telling. There are moments in life, as small as a grain of sand, but enough to tilt the sky. For me, that moment came on an autumn afternoon, when I was 13 years old, standing before Miss Schmidt, and daring to let the most painful words slip out of my mouth for the first time. "I am Maria Schmidt, the girl who lived in the yellow house at the end of Linden Street, where light was just an empty promise." If you have followed my story through the previous parts, you know about my father, the man with the face of a monster behind a perfect shell, and my mother, who chose to stay silent to keep a false peace. You know about the straw broom with a wooden handle, which became my nightmare since I was 8 years old. Today, I will tell you about the day I decided to break through the darkness, about the person who reached out to pull me out of hell, and about the first steps on the path to finding myself again. Tired days. When I was 13, I had lived with the nightmare for 5 years. 5 years is a long time, enough to turn a cheerful girl into a quiet shadow, always bowing her head, always afraid. I was no longer the Maria who loved to draw colorful houses or jump rope with her friends. I was the Maria of bruises hidden under long-sleeve shirts, of sleepless nights because of the sound of keys in the lock, of dreams that never had a happy ending. At school, I was like a ghost. I sat at the back of the class, avoiding everyone's eyes, not answering teachers' questions, not participating in games during recess. My grades were so bad that teachers started whispering to each other, but no one dared to ask directly. In those days, family matters were inviolable. "Maybe she's just going through puberty," they said. "She'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. I didn't know if I would live until tomorrow. The nightmare in the yellow house grew worse. My father no longer waited for my mother to leave. Some nights, he did it right in front of her, in the living room, where the light from the fireplace fell on the pale yellow walls. My mother sat there, sometimes bowing her head, sometimes looking at me with a strange look, not pity, not anger, but something empty, as if she had abandoned all emotion. "Don't make a noise," she would say, when I cried too loudly. "The neighbors will hear." Those words rubbed salt into the wound, reminding me that I had not only been betrayed by my father, but also abandoned by my mother. I began to think about death more often, not because I wanted to give up, but because I saw no way out. One time, I stood in the kitchen, looking at the fruit knife on the table, wondering if it would cut the pain. But then I remembered Miss Schmidt, my history teacher, the only person who seemed to see me, not the shadow, but Maria, the girl trying to survive. Her words, "You are stronger than you think," rang in my head, like an old but unforgettable song. Seeds of hope. Miss Schmidt was the only light in those dark days. She was not only a teacher, but also a listener, a believer. She gave me a small notebook, telling me to write or draw when I was sad. I didn't dare write about my parents, afraid they would find out, but I drew. I drew birds flying over the hills, houses without doors, deep blue skies. Those drawings were where I put my dreams, though I didn't dare believe they would come true. Miss Schmidt also started keeping me after school, not to tutor, but to talk. She told me about her childhood, about the hardships she had gone through, though she never said anything. "Some things hurt, Maria," she said, "but they don't define you. You decide who you become." Those words, simple as they were, planted a seed of hope in me. I began to think that if she believed I could be strong, maybe I could actually do something. One time, Miss Schmidt gave me a homemade cookie, wrapped in wax paper. "I'm a clumsy cookie," she laughed, "but I think you'll like it." The cookie, though slightly burned around the edges, was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. Not because of the taste, but because it reminded me that someone cared about me, even if just a little. The day everything changed. The day came on a Wednesday afternoon, when I was 13. The night before, I'd been beaten for breaking a glass in the kitchen. My father, as usual, had used a broom to discipline me. This time, I was in so much pain that I couldn't sit in school. I tried to hide it, but every step was torture. Miss Schmidt noticed. She always noticed. After class, she locked the classroom door and pulled me into a chair. "Maria, what's going on at home?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I looked down at the floor, silent. Fear still clung to me, like an invisible thread. "Look at me," she said. I looked up, and in her eyes I saw genuine sympathy, not pity, but deep understanding. "No one deserves to suffer, especially a child. If someone hurts you, you can tell me." And then, like a dam breaking, the words poured out. I told them everything, unchecked, unthinking. About the broom, about the blood on the floor, about the nights I cried myself dry, about my mother watching through the crack in the door, about my father's threats, about the yellow house that had become a prison. I told them, and each word was like a knife to my heart, but also a stone lifted from my chest. When I was done, I was shaking, afraid, thinking she wouldn't believe me, that she would think I was making it up. But Miss Schmidt didn't turn away. She had tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I believe you," she said. Those 3 words, simple but powerful, were like a door opening in the darkness. "I believe in you, and we're going to work this out." Miss Schmidt's plan. Miss Schmidt didn't just listen. She acted. She told me to keep it a secret, not to tell my parents, and to continue going to school as usual. "We need proof," she said. "Otherwise, they'll deny it, and you'll be in danger." I was scared, but I believed her. Miss Schmidt had told me very vaguely that she had been a traumatized girl herself, that she understood what I was going through. I didn't ask for details, but I could hear the sincerity in her voice. She told me to write down the abuse if I could, in a notebook she'd given me. "Just write down what you remember, the date, what happened. Don't let them see it." I began to write, trembling as I wrote, afraid my parents would find out. But I also felt a small strength growing. Each line was a small step toward reclaiming myself. Miss Schmidt also taught me how to collect evidence. "The broom," she said. "It's important. Don't let them throw it away." One time, when my parents were out, I took the broom and hid it under my bed. I also took an old, bloody dress and wrapped it in a cloth bag and put it in the corner of my closet. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I trusted Miss Schmidt. She also found a way to meet me privately outside of class, in a small corner of the school library where no one would notice. She brought an old camera with her and told me to take pictures of bruises on my body, if possible. "Only when you feel safe," she said. "I don't want you to be in danger." I was scared, but I did. I took pictures of bruises on my arms, on my thighs, in the bathroom when my parents weren't home. Every time I clicked the shutter, I felt like I was fighting, even if it was just a small battle. First step out of the darkness a month later, Miss Schmidt said it was time to act. She contacted a friend who worked in child welfare, a woman named Frau Weber, who had helped children like me. "We need to be careful," Miss Schmidt said. "Your father is a respected figure in town. If we don't have solid evidence, they won't believe us." She arranged a meeting with Frau Weber, but not at my house, but in a small office on the outskirts of Heidelberg. That day, Miss Schmidt picked me up after school, telling my parents that I needed to stay for a history project. My father was suspicious, but my mother, as usual, said nothing. I walked with Miss Schmidt, my heart pounding, clutching the notebook and the duffel bag containing the dress. In the office, Frau Weber, a middle-aged woman with a gentle gaze, listened as I told her everything. Miss Schmidt sat next to me, holding my hand as I trembled. When I showed her the dress and the photos, Frau Weber nodded. "I believe in you," she said, echoing Miss Schmidt. "We will protect you." They made plans to get me out of the house that night. Miss Schmidt offered to let me stay with her while the authorities investigated. "You will be safe," she said. "I promise." And for the first time in 5 years, I believed I could be safe. My story is not over. In the next part, I will tell about the day my father was arrested, about my mother's final betrayal, and about my journey back to the light after years of darkness. If you are listening, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and if you can, give a like. Every encouragement is a reminder that I am not alone, and that my story can help others find their light. When you stand before a door that is about to open, do you ever wonder what awaits you on the other side? One autumn afternoon, when I was 13, I stood before that door, not the wooden door of the yellow house, but the door to freedom, to a life I had never dared to dream of. But what will happen when that door opens, and will the light I find be enough to dispel the darkness that has haunted me for 5 years? I am Maria Schmidt, the girl who was imprisoned in her own house, where my father became a monster and my mother chose to remain silent. In the previous part, you learned about the day I dared to tell the truth to Miss Schmidt, about the careful plan to collect evidence, and about the first ray of hope when I met Frau Weber, the woman who promised to protect me. Today, I will tell you about the day my father was arrested, about my mother's final betrayal, and about the first steps I took on the path to finding myself. But be prepared, because this story is not all light. It also has dark corners that I never want to look back at. The day the door opened that evening, it was drizzling in Heidelberg, small drops of water pattering on the yellow roof. I sat in my room, holding the notebook that Miss Schmidt had given me, feeling like 1,000 butterflies were fluttering around. Miss Schmidt and Frau Weber had made a plan. Tonight, they would take me out of the house, and the Child Protection Agency would start an investigation. I was scared, but I also felt something strange, a little courage, like a small fire that Miss Schmidt had lit inside me. Miss Schmidt came to pick me up at 6 p.m., the exact time my father usually put the key in the lock. She knocked on the door, her voice soft but firm. "Herr Schmidt, I need to see Maria about the history project." My father, as usual, frowned, but my mother, standing behind him, just nodded. "Go, Maria," she said, not meeting my eyes. I walked out, clutching the canvas bag containing the bloody dress and the photos of the bruises. I didn't dare look back, afraid that if I saw the yellow house again, I wouldn't have the strength to leave. Miss Schmidt took me to her house, a small apartment on the outskirts of Heidelberg, where the smells of homemade cookies and old books mingled in the air. "You're safe," she said, closing the door. But I didn't feel safe. I was afraid my father would come after me, afraid he'd keep his threat to kill me and my mother. Miss Schmidt seemed to read my mind. "They don't know you're here," she said, "and I won't let anyone hurt you." That night, I slept on Miss Schmidt's sofa, wrapped in a warm wool blanket. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to the sound of a key. But my sleep was still filled with nightmares, the image of the broom, my mother's cold gaze, and my father's voice echoing, "If you tell, I'll kill you." The day my father was arrested the next morning, Frau Weber came to Miss Schmidt's house. She brought with her a man in uniform, Mr. Hans, a local police officer. "Maria," she said, her voice gentle but serious, "we're coming to your house today. We have a search warrant, and we're going to take the broom and the other things you told me. You don't have to come with us, but if you want, you can tell Mr. Hans everything." I was scared, but I nodded. I wanted my father to pay, wanted him to never hurt me or anyone else again. I told him everything, every detail, with Mr. Hans taking careful notes. Miss Schmidt sat next to me, holding my hand, keeping me from shaking as I talked about the broom, about the nights in the kitchen, about my mother's eyes through the crack in the door. When I showed him the dress and the photos, Hans nodded. "Brave girl," he said. "We'll take care of it." That afternoon, I stayed at Miss Schmidt's, while Frau Weber and Hans went to the Yellow House. Miss Schmidt later said that my father had been furious when the police arrived, shouting that they had no right, that he was a model citizen. But when they found the broom under the bed, the very broom I had hidden, and compared it with the bloody dress, he couldn't deny it. They took him away, while my mother stood at the door, white-faced, speechless. My father was arrested for child abuse. The neighbors whispered, unable to believe that the exemplary Herr Schmidt had done such a terrible thing. But I didn't care what they thought. I just felt a strange void inside me, not relief, not joy, but emptiness, as if I had lost something, even if it was something I didn't want to keep. The final betrayal. My mother is a different story. I thought, when my father was arrested, she would apologize, hug me, say she didn't know, that she was wrong. But no, when Frau Weber took me back to the house to get my things, my mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at the floor. "Maria," she said, her voice hoarse, "why did you do this to your father? Why did you destroy this family?" I was stunned. Destroyed the family? I, the 13-year-old who had endured 5 years of pain, was the one who destroyed it. I wanted to scream, to ask why she didn't protect me, why she stood by while I cried for help, but I couldn't say anything. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't cry out loud. Frau Weber took my hand and led me out of the house. "You don't have to stay here," she said. "You deserve something better." My mother was investigated for complicity, but she wasn't arrested. Later, I heard that she became withdrawn, rarely went out, and the neighbors began to avoid her. I never forgave her, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. Her betrayal, her silence, left a scar deeper than the bruises on my body. The first days of freedom, Miss Schmidt took me in as a foster child while Child Protection Services looked for a suitable family. But for me, her home was home. Her small apartment, with its smell of cookies and old books, was the first place I felt safe. She taught me how to bake, even though I was so clumsy that I burned the oven. "It's okay," she laughed. "A little burnt is still edible." She also taught me how to trust again, even though it wasn't easy. I started going to school again, but this time, I was no longer the quiet girl sitting at the back of the class. I was still shy about communicating, still afraid of other people's eyes, but I tried. Miss Schmidt helped me with my homework, encouraged me to draw and write. "You have a story to tell," she said. "Someday, you will use it to help others." My father was sentenced to prison. He died there a few years later, but I felt nothing when I heard the news. To me, he had been dead for a long time, since the night he turned into a monster in the kitchen. My mother died of cancer when I was 20. I did not go to the funeral, not because I hated her, but because I no longer felt like she was my mother. The journey to finding myself. Miss Schmidt not only saved me from the Yellow House, she also helped me find Maria, the girl who used to be happy, who dreamed of drawing bright houses. When I was 16, she officially adopted me. I took her last name, not because I wanted to erase the past, but because I wanted to carry her light into the future. I went to college, became a family rights lawyer, helping children like me. I married a gentle man who never asked about my past unless I wanted to talk. We have 2 children, and I vowed never to let them feel alone or afraid like I did. At 71, I stand behind the pastry counter in Heidelberg's Market Square, where children clamor for gingerbread and cinnamon stars. I tell my story through speaking engagements, through this video, to remind people that abuse can happen behind closed doors, and that every child deserves to be protected. My story doesn't end here. In the next part, I'll tell you about my journey to recovery, about the psychological scars I carry, and about how I turn my pain into strength. But before I close, I want to ask, what do you think of this story? Leave a comment, let me know where you are, and if you can, give it a like. Every encouragement is a reminder that I am not alone, and that my story might shed a light on someone in the dark. And ask yourself, if you saw a child quiet, head down, would you dare to ask, is everything okay? Have you ever wondered, after escaping the darkness, how to learn to love the light again? When I walked out of the Yellow House, I thought everything would be easy, that just leaving that place, I would return to the Maria of my carefree days. But the truth is, although my body was free, my soul was still imprisoned by invisible scars, and the journey to find myself had only just begun. I am Maria Schmidt, the girl who lived in a nightmare for 5 years in the yellow house, where my father turned into a monster and my mother chose to stay silent. In the previous part, you learned about the day I was freed, the day my father was arrested, and the final betrayal of my mother. You also learned about Miss Schmidt, who not only saved me but also became my real family. Today, I will tell you about the years that followed the days when I learned to heal, to face the pain, and to turn the scars into strength. But be prepared, because this story is not all about triumphs. It also has days when I fell, and nights when I thought I couldn't go on. The first days in the light when I left the yellow house, I was 13, skinny, with eyes fixed on the ground. Miss Schmidt took me to her small apartment on the outskirts of Heidelberg, where the smell of burnt biscuits and old books became my refuge. For the first time in 5 years, I slept without the sound of a key in the lock. But the sleep was not peaceful. The nightmares still came, carrying the image of the broom, my mother's cold gaze, and my father's voice, "If you tell, I will kill you." I woke up in a cold sweat, and there were nights when I didn't dare go back to sleep, afraid that the darkness would drag me back. Miss Schmidt understood. She didn't force me to cheer up or forget. Instead, she sat next to me, made me chamomile tea, and told me stories about old Heidelberg, about the old bridges and the bustling markets. "You don't have to be strong right now," she said. "Just being here, with me, is enough." Those words were like a thin rope, keeping me from falling off the cliff. Miss Schmidt asked child protection to let me stay with her temporarily. She turned the small apartment into a home. She taught me how to bake, even though I was so clumsy that I spilled flour all over the floor. "That's okay," she laughed. "Flour spills are a reminder that life doesn't have to be perfect." She also encouraged me to draw, write, and talk about how I felt. I began writing in the notebook she gave me, not about what had happened, but about the dreams I wanted to have: a house without doors, a sky full of birds, a life without fear. Invisible scars. But healing was not easy. I carried psychological scars that no one could see. I was afraid of heavy footsteps, of tall men, of dark corners in the house. Once, Miss Schmidt accidentally dropped a broom in the kitchen, and I screamed, ran into my room, hugging my pillow. She didn't blame me. She just sat outside the door, saying softly, "I'm here, Maria. When you're ready, I'm here." I was also afraid to trust. Although Miss Schmidt was gentle and patient, I was always waiting for the moment when she would turn away, like my mother had. I was afraid that if I opened up, I would be hurt again. Miss Schmidt noticed, and she didn't force me. She just did little things, leaving a cookie on my desk, writing notes saying good job when I finished my homework, or simply sitting with me when I was quiet. When I was 14, Miss Schmidt took me to see a psychiatrist, Frau Keller. At first, I didn't want to go. I was afraid to tell my story, afraid to relive those terrible nights. But Frau Keller was different from what I had expected. She didn't ask many questions, didn't force me to talk. Instead, she asked me to tell her about my drawings, about the dreams I had written in my notebook. "You don't have to tell me about the past if you're not ready," she said. "Tell me about the future you want." And I told her, about the day I would bake cakes for the children, about a family without pain, about a Maria without fear. Finding Maria when I was 16, Miss Schmidt officially adopted me. I took her name, not to erase the past, but to carry her light into the future. That was the day I smiled for the first time in years, a smile not to hide the pain, but because I was truly happy. Miss Schmidt threw a small party, just me, her, and Frau Weber, with a homemade cake she called a sweet disaster. We laughed, and in that moment I felt not just a broken girl, but someone who could start over. I went back to school, no longer sitting at the back of the class. I tried to study, which wasn't easy. The nightmares still came, but less often. I made friends with some of my classmates, though I was still shy when they asked about my family. "I live with my teacher," I said, and fortunately they didn't ask. I also started drawing again, not just dreams, but real things: bridges in Heidelberg, market stalls, smiling children's faces. When I was 18, I decided to study law, not because I loved the law, but because I wanted to protect children like me. Miss Schmidt supported me, even though she worried I would be overwhelmed. "You don't need to save the world," she said. "Just save yourself." But I wanted to do more. I wanted to make sure that no child would suffer like I did, that no mother would be silent, that no father would escape justice. Turning pain into power. I graduated from college and became a family rights lawyer. I worked with abused children, listened to their stories, and helped them find their voices. Every time I stood before a frightened child, I saw myself. I believe in you, I said, as Miss Schmidt had told me. And each time, I felt a part of my scar heal. I met my husband Paul when I was 25. He was a gentle man, with a smile that reminded me of cloudless mornings. He never pressed me to talk about my past, but when I was ready, he listened. We have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and I vowed never to let them feel alone or afraid. I told them about Miss Schmidt, about the grandmother who saved me, and I taught them that family is not blood, but people who love and protect you. At 71, I stand behind the pastry counter in Heidelberg's Market Square. The smell of gingerbread and cinnamon stars wafts through the air, drawing children to me. I don't just sell cookies, I tell my story through talks, through these videos, to remind people that abuse can happen behind closed doors. I want children to know that they are not alone, that they can speak up, and that there is someone who will believe them. Looking back and moving on, Miss Schmidt passed away when I was 40. She left me a letter, saying she was proud of me, that I was her light. I keep that letter in a wooden box, along with the notebook I wrote in those days. My father died in prison, my mother died of cancer, but I no longer hate them. Not because I forgive them, but because I no longer want them to define my life. The scars are still there, in my soul. There are days when I wake up, hear footsteps, and startle. There are nights when I dream of the yellow house and wake up in tears, but I am no longer afraid. I have learned to live with the scars, to turn them into strength. Every cake I bake, every story I tell, is an affirmation that I survived, that I won. My story does not end here. I continue, not only for myself, but for the children in the dark, waiting for someone to reach out. If you're listening, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and if you can, drop a like. And remember, if you see a child quiet, head down, ask, is everything okay? Because sometimes a simple question can change a life. Lessons from the Yellow House. There are heartbreaking stories that are not easy to tell, but they teach us that light always exists, even in the deepest darkness. I am Maria Schmidt, a former prisoner in the Yellow House, where my father became a monster and my mother chose to remain silent. From my painful 5-year journey and subsequent years of recovery, I have learned valuable lessons, not only for myself, but for anyone who is listening. Speaking up is power. When I was 13, I told Miss Schmidt the truth, even though I was terrified that my father would carry out his threat to kill me. But speaking up opened the door to freedom. If you are suffering, whether as a child or an adult, find someone you trust and speak up. A word can break the chains. Silence is complicity. My mother knew but chose not to act, and that silence hurt more than the bruises on my body. If you see signs of abuse, a quiet child, hidden bruises, don't turn away. A simple question, is everything okay, can save a life. You are stronger than you think. Miss Schmidt once told me I was strong, even though I didn't believe it. But every step I took, from hiding evidence, to learning to trust again, to becoming a lawyer, proved that the power lies within you, even when you feel broken. Healing is a journey. Escaping the Yellow House did not erase the scars. Nightmares, fears, and doubts still haunted me. But through therapy, Miss Schmidt's support, and my own determination, I learned to live with my scars and to use them as motivation to help others. Family is more than blood. Miss Schmidt, who is not blood related, became my true family. Family is people who love, protect, and believe in you. Find and cherish those people in your life. At 71, standing behind the pastry counter, I share this story to remind you that abuse may happen behind closed doors, but the light is always there, waiting for you to reach out. If you see a child with their head down, stop and listen. If you are in the dark, look for a ray of light, however small. And believe that, like me, you can turn your pain into strength, your scars into a story of inspiration.